An engineer is drawn into an alien world and faces a crisis. Reese Alvaron could hardly believe what was happening. As an engineer for the Earth exploration team, he never imagined he would find himself stranded on a foreign planet so far away that no one even knew where he was. After an accident during a flight through unexplored star systems, Reese was left with only a damaged ship amidst scorching desert winds, with broken communication equipment and dwindling food reserves. He had lost contact with his team with no hope left but to attempt to fix the remaining equipment. But could he survive before his resources ran out? Save someone, Reese mumbled as he dragged his hand across the scorching metal surface. The spacecraft had failed to rescue him, so who would he had tried every method to restore the communication system, using old materials and makeshift tools. Yet each attempt only worsened the situation. The sense of hopelessness grew as he looked into the vastness of space, feeling the cold emptiness surrounding him. At that moment, a sound came from afar, something Reese couldn't identify. He heard a loud noise like something moving across the hot sand. Despite the anxiety rising within him, Reese decided to follow the direction of the sound. He had nothing left to lose, only one faint hope. Was there someone here? And could they rescue him? Traversing the barren land, Reese saw a huge silhouette moving through the dusty haze. It was an alien warrior clad in ancient armor, with a long tail that twisted like a sacred flame. Reese couldn't believe his eyes. But nothing around him could make him forget one thing: he had been captured. "Don't move!" The warrior's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had eyes as bright as distant stars. Though Reese could only see part of her face, the stern expression on her features made him feel there was a deep strength hidden within. "You've caused enough trouble," she said in a soft yet sharp tone. Reese could only stay silent. He couldn't understand why he had been captured, but one thing was certain: his life here on this planet would never be as easy as he had imagined. As Zephyra, as she was now known to him, began to take hold of her weapon, Reese felt a chill run down his spine. She was not one to be easily subdued, and whether he liked it or not, had been pulled into the mysterious world of an ancient ritual he had never heard of before. As he looked at her tail, long and twisting with strange light emanating from it, Reese didn't understand why, but he couldn't stop his curiosity. "How can you survive here?" Reese asked, his voice tired but still filled with curiosity. "I can't fix anything." "You don't need to fix anything," Zephyr answered, her gaze lingering for a moment before looking directly at Reese. "You just need to understand that you've been caught in a ritual you cannot escape." Reese didn't understand what she meant, but deep down he knew he had no choice but to continue participating in this game. Could he find a way to escape this ritual before it was too late? Or would he be sucked into a fate he could never have anticipated? Zephyr stood before Reese, her hand tightly gripping her weapon, the light flashing from the strange patterns on her long tail. It felt as though the space around them had suddenly thickened, filled with tension, as every breath Reese took echoed in the silence. He couldn't take his eyes off her unique tail. It flickered like distant stars, seeming to hold the power of the universe within. But his curiosity couldn't hide the fear he felt. "Your tail? What's... what's wrong with it?" Reese asked, fully aware that his question might cause trouble. Zephyr gave a slight smirk. She didn't respond immediately, instead giving him a sharp look as if she was reading his mind. "You wouldn't understand. Don't ask about things you can't control." Reese immediately felt that he had made a big mistake. He wasn't the type to be recklessly curious, but there was something about her strange tale that made him unable to contain his fascination. He didn't understand anything about this place or the ritual she had mentioned. But one thing was clear: Safara was no ordinary warrior. She held some power that Reese couldn't explain, and her tale wasn't just a part of her, it was the center of the entire event he had found himself caught in. "The reason I ask is that I'm trying to understand what you're doing," Reese said awkwardly. "And why me? Why did you bring me into this ritual?" Zephyra glanced at him, narrowing her eyes. "You have no choice. This ritual was decided long ago. You've become a part of it whether you want to or not." Reese felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He knew he couldn't back out. Now couldn't return alone to this desolate world. But what would the cost be? He couldn't ignore that question, even though it might be the one thing that left him with no way out. "So what do you want from me?" "Why do I have to take part in a ritual I don't even understand?" Reese continued, Although he could clearly sense that his questions were only adding more tension to the situation, Zephyr didn't answer immediately. She paused and looked up at the distant sky where the desolate atmosphere of the planet seemed to encapsulate all the loneliness and mystery. After a moment, she spoke in a soft voice, as if sharing an ancient secret she found difficult to reveal. This flame, it's not just a flame. It is a sacred artifact, a protector, and a punishment. Each of us, the warriors, carries a flame within us. But when that flame is lit, we cannot turn back. Reese felt a wave of dizziness. He had just begun to understand part of what she was saying, but there were still too many questions left unanswered. A sacred flame connected to an ancient ritual that Reese couldn't even begin to grasp. But then something deep inside his mind began to flicker. So, is your tale connected to this flame? Reese asked, his voice no longer full of curiosity, but now filled with skepticism. Zephyra turned back to him, her gaze like it could pierce through his mind. It's not just the tale, it's me too. When that flame was lit, I couldn't give it up. It chose me. She paused for a moment, then added, and now that flame has chosen you. Reese looked into her eyes, unsure of what to say. A heavy feeling rose within him. Could this flame be a source of power or danger? He wasn't sure, but one thing he knew for certain, this wasn't just an accident, and the cost he would pay could be more than he ever imagined. Could this flame kill me? Reese asked, his eyes wide, unable to tear them away from Zephyra. Zephyra smiled faintly, but it was a smile filled with understanding. No, the flame won't kill you, but it can change you. That is what you will have to face. A battle not just with the world outside, but also with himself awaited Reese ahead. A world where the existence of a flame could alter destinies not just for one person, but for the entire world. Reese had no choice but to continue stepping into this whirlwind. But he wondered, would the price to escape it be too high? Or would he have to pay a cost he could never return? From Reese couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into a game he didn't understand, an ancient ritual, whose rules and conditions were too complex and dangerous. He wasn't the type to seek out risks, but now he had no choice but to continue surviving, even if just for a little while longer. He needed to understand what was happening if he had any chance of escaping. Zephyra seemed to notice Reese's confusion. She observed him slowly, her eyes full of understanding, as if reading his mind. You can't understand right now, she said, her voice hoarse but resolute. This ritual has existed for a long time, and you are a part of it. The flame chose you, and now you can't turn back. Reese felt something tighten in his chest. Can this flame change me? He asked, knowing that the answer wouldn't be pleasant. But truly he had to know. Everything was so vague and dangerous. The flame is a part of us, Zephyr continued. It is power and it is also punishment. We are chosen not because we are worthy, but because we can endure. Once it is ignited, the flame will protect us, but it will also make us into something we can't control. She paused, her gaze drifting to her long, twisting tail behind her. For you, it hasn't ignited yet, but when it does, you won't be able to turn back. You will become a part of this ritual, a called one. Reese tried to digest what Zephyra had just said. He didn't fully understand, but one thing was clear: he was no longer caught in an accidental expedition, but a part of a ritual where everything was not as it seemed. Zephyra's tale, the sacred flame, all of this had something to do with something much bigger, and he was a part of it. So why do I have to participate? Reese asked, the feeling of helplessness growing inside him. If I haven't done anything wrong, if I'm just an outsider, why am I being dragged into this? Zephyra turned back to him, her face serious and filled with pain. The ritual isn't your choice, Reese. It has been decided long ago. You may think you're not involved, but the flame has chosen you, and now you will have to live with it. Reese looked up at her, anxiety and unease mounting within him. He had never felt like he could change his destiny, but now everything was changing rapidly. And when Zephyra spoke of the called one, Reese couldn't shake the feeling that he couldn't escape this fate whether he wanted to or not. I don't understand, Reese said, his voice tired. So what am I supposed to do? I just want to fix the ship and leave. I don't want to be part of this ritual. Zephyra stared at him, and then finally she spoke. If you don't want to participate, the flame will no longer protect you. And if the flame doesn't protect you, Those who seek the flame will come. You won't survive without this connection. Reese suddenly realized that he was being pushed into a situation with no way out. There was no path to safety, no choice but to face what was happening. He looked at Zafira, the strong warrior with deep scars, feeling the weight in her eyes. "So what do I do?" Reese asked, his voice trembling. Zafira closed her eyes for a moment as though she was thinking deeply before answering. "You must learn to live with it. Accept the flame and what it brings. If you don't, you won't survive on this planet." Reese felt as though he was being thrust into a battle for which he wasn't prepared. Everything was going too far, and he didn't know what he could do to change it. But one thing he knew for sure: if he didn't learn to adapt, he wouldn't survive long on this planet. Zephyr turned back her gaze filled with resolve. "We will get through this together. But you must understand, Reese, this flame is not just protection. It can destroy anything if activated. And now you are a part of it." Reese could only remain silent, feeling confused, anxious, and pushed to the limits of his curiosity. Could he withstand this flame? And could he find a way to escape it without paying too high a price? Zephyr's glowing tail still undulated in the air, casting soft, ethereal rays as she led Reese through a jagged stone valley, her eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. The air was heavy, as if something was drawing near. Reese felt the tension building, and he could hear the wind howling through the rocks. But what he couldn't ignore were Zephyr's words about the Flame Seekers, beings she was not eager to face. "The Flame Seekers are coming," Zafira said, her voice cold and determined. "When the flame is lit, they will come for it. And this flame, if left unprotected, will be an invitation to death for them." Reese looked at her, not fully understanding the meaning behind her words, but he could clearly sense the danger closing in on them both. One more moment and the hunters would arrive like an inevitable storm. He wondered if this sacred flame could truly protect him, or if it would thrust him into an even worse situation. "What do we do?" Reese asked, his anxiety rising. "I don't know how to protect myself, let alone the flame." Zafira turned to look at him, her eyes flashing with a strange intensity. "The flame will protect you, but you must learn how to control it. If you can't, the flame will only weaken you, and we will be destroyed." A cold shiver ran down Reese's spine as she spoke those words. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't trained for combat. All he knew was how to repair broken equipment and solve technical problems. But now he was facing a battle not with technology, but with hunters and a strange power he couldn't control. The sky above began to shift from the pale light of the sun to the dark gloom of night. Reese felt an unusual change in the air. It was a stillness thick with danger, as if everything was waiting for an explosion. Then a sound echoed from far away, like the heavy thud of footsteps drawing nearer. "They're here," Zafira whispered, her voice now tight with urgency. She started moving faster, pulling Reese along with her. "You have to be ready." Reese didn't have time to ask any more questions. They ran along the towering stone ridges, their feet stumbling over jutting rocks, but neither of them stopped. Reese could hear the sound of the Flame Seekers, their heavy steps like a pack of wolves closing in on them. They were getting closer. Before he could process his feelings, Reese and Zafira reached a narrow stone crevice. Zafira turned, locking eyes with him, as if transmitting some power he couldn't quite understand. "Now is the time, Reese," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "The flame will protect you, but only if you let it ignite. Don't be afraid." Reese stood between the stone walls, feeling as though the world around him had frozen. He could sense the presence of the Flame Seekers, the hunters, drawing near. They were no ordinary creatures. They were born to seek the sacred flame, to test its power, and to take whatever was needed. "Don't be afraid," Zephyr said again, as if she knew the worry inside his mind. "This flame may not only protect you, it can change your fate." Reese didn't know what to do. He had no strength. He wasn't a warrior. But there was one thing he knew for certain: if he didn't act now, the Flame Seekers wouldn't just destroy him. They could destroy Zephyr and everything around them. With a powerful leap, he stepped forward, his eyes tightly shut, and suddenly a searing heat rushed through his body. The sacred flame erupted from within him, as though it had been waiting for this moment his whole life. It was unlike any power he had ever felt before. It was strong, violent, and completely beyond his control. Zephyr saw Reese's movement, and she knew the flame had truly ignited. But at the same time, she also knew this was just the beginning. The flame wouldn't only protect him, It was creating changes that they could never have anticipated. The Flame Seekers had arrived, and Reese wasn't ready for what was about to happen. The battle with the Flame Seekers erupted immediately, but the truth was, Reese was never ready for a fight like this. The flame ignited within him like a wild beast thrashing uncontrollably, burning hot, and it felt as though a powerful stream of energy was coursing through his body. He didn't know how to control it, but it seemed to empower him, filling him with a strange sensation. Not fear, but a thirst for battle. Safara stood beside him, her gaze no longer cold. She looked at Reese, noticing the distinct change in him. She knew the sacred flame had truly ignited within him, but the cost would not be small. Reese looked ahead, his eyes still dominated by the sacred flame, and he felt his body weighed down, as if being pulled by an invisible force. Though he didn't fully understand what was happening, one thing became clear to him. He couldn't give up. He couldn't turn back. He was a part of this battle whether he chose it or not. "Zafara!" Reese gasped, his voice hoarse, his breathing heavy. "How can I control this flame? I don't understand it." Zafara didn't answer immediately. She turned to him, her eyes full of understanding and determination. "The flame is not something you can control with your mind," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "It can only be controlled when you understand yourself. You must face your fear, your instincts." Reese looked into her eyes, feeling the sincerity in her words. Zafara's gaze was no longer that of a cold warrior, but of someone who had been through battles and suffering. Reese realized that if he could conquer the fear within him, he could control the flame. "So, I have to face my fear?" Reese asked, still not fully understanding. "Yes," Zafara nodded. "The flame is only strong when you don't run from it. You have to accept it as a part of you. When you do, the flame will become your strength." Zafara's words were a powerful encouragement, a guide to help Reese realize that in order to survive in this world, he couldn't rely solely on logic or fear. He had to find a way to integrate the sacred flame, make it a part of himself. The sky above began to shift from a dark black to a fiery red. The flame seekers had arrived, drawing closer, their shadowy forms lurking in the darkness, moving swiftly and indiscernibly. But Reese couldn't stop. He had made his decision. He would fight, even if he didn't fully understand the flame. "Zafara," Reese said, his voice more resolute, "we can't run anymore. They're coming, and I'll stand here with you." Zafara looked at him, a small smile appearing on her lips. She didn't need to say anything more. That was all she needed to hear from him. Together they stood ready to face the approaching hunters. Every step Reese took seemed to carry a newfound power, and though he didn't fully understand it, he knew he wasn't alone. Zafara would be by his side, and they would fight together. Suddenly, a noise echoed from the front footsteps of the flame seekers, growing louder. Reese felt the flame inside him flare up even stronger. His eyes shone brightly, his heart pounding as if it were about to burst. He felt a power he had never known before. And in that moment, he realized that the sacred flame wasn't just protection, it was his strength, and he could control it. "We can't let them have the flame," Zafara whispered, her eyes now filled with determination. "We will fight." Reese nodded, and immediately they charged into battle. The flame seekers appeared from the shadows, strange creatures, tall, with eyes blazing like fire. They moved quickly and powerfully, like surging waves, showing no fear. But Reese no longer felt afraid. The flame inside him had turned him into a warrior, someone who could face death without retreat. "Together!" Zafara shouted, raising her weapon to the sky. Reese felt the power surge within him as he charged into battle, a man from Earth, now carrying the strength of a sacred flame, fighting beside an alien warrior. The two of them, despite all the differences in race and civilization, were fighting together for survival. In the bloody, tense battle, Reese realized one thing: his life had changed forever. No longer just an engineer, he was now a part of a larger war, one from which he could not retreat. And with Zafara by his side, he would fight until the end. The battle erupted violently, with the flame seekers charging in at lightning speed, their weapons glowing brightly under the dim light of the desolate planet. Reese felt the power of the flame inside him, surging fierce and wild. The burning heat seemed to sear his body, but at the same time he felt a sense of harmony with it. The flame was not just a protector, but an endless source of strength. Zafara fought beside him, leaping with sharp, swift sword strikes, moving like the seasoned warrior she was a part of this world. Meanwhile, Reese, though he had never fought before, felt an exhilarating surge as the sacred flame overtook his body. He realized that even though he wasn't a warrior, he could still control this battle if only he truly understood and accepted the flame. But not everything unfolded as they had hoped. In a moment when Reese was engaged with one of the flame seekers, another shadow appeared behind him. The attack came too fast for him to react. One strong blow sent him flying out of the fray, his body aching, arms and legs numb. Zephyra turned, seeing Reese fall to the ground, and immediately she rushed to intercept a deadly attack from another flame seeker protecting him. "Reese!" she called out before returning to fight the enemy, but Reese couldn't get up right away. The pain spreading through his body forced him to push himself up with one final effort. The sacred flame within him now was no longer just a protector. It began making him realize something he had never thought about before. This power could change him into someone else, someone who was no longer himself but merely a tool in the hands of fate. He couldn't continue running after this battle. He knew that if he didn't act now, Zephyra wouldn't be fighting just for herself, but for him too. "Zephyra!" Reese gasped, his voice full of desperation. "If I can't control this flame, I won't survive. Neither of us will." Zephyra, having just defeated a flame seeker, looked at him with concern in her eyes. She rushed to his side, placing her hand on his shoulder gently but firmly, as though trying to give him strength. "Reese," she said, her voice gentle but unwavering, "this flame is not just power to kill. It is a choice. And you must choose, do you want to become a part of it, or will you continue fighting for yourself, for the people you love?" Zephyra's words hit Reese's mind like a powerful strike. He had never viewed the flame as a part of himself. He had been swept up by it like a puppet in the hands of fate. But now he understood that in order to survive, he couldn't just be a tool of the flame. He had to choose his own path no matter what the cost. A strange but powerful feeling surged within Reese. He felt the flame in his body yielding to his will. He no longer feared it. Instead, he felt he could control it not by defeating it, but by harmonizing with it. This flame, like his destiny, was not something that was set in stone. He had the power to choose. "Zephyra," Reese said, his voice firmer than ever before, "I won't let you down. I will choose my own path." Zephyra looked into his eyes, and in that moment she knew Reese had understood the true nature of the sacred flame and of this battle. It was not about blind strength or mere victory. It was about freedom and the ability to choose something they had long lost. Reese stood up completely different from the person he was when he began this fight. He looked at the flame seekers approaching, and this time he felt no fear. The flame within him was no longer something foreign. It was now a part of him. He was ready to fight, but not for the flame, not for the ancient ritual. He was fighting for himself, for his own freedom, and for Zephyra's. Zephyra gave him a slight smile, not one of victory, but of understanding, as if she were seeing a new person in Reese. "We will succeed," she said, and then charged into battle once more. Reese followed her, no longer just a survivor, but a fighter for what he truly believed in. Not for the flame, not for the ancient ritual, but for the right to choose his own fate. Reese and Zephyra had successfully driven back the flame seekers, but not without a cost. Reese's body still ached every step a challenge, yet he felt a new strength within him, not from the sacred flame, but from the freedom he had regained. He no longer felt like a tool controlled by others, but the master of his own fate. Zephyra stood beside him, her eyes full of pride and trust. She knew that Reese had overcome the greatest challenge, not the battle with the flame seekers, but the battle with himself. They had fought not just for survival, but for the preservation of their own freedom. Now they were no longer bound by ancient rituals or fates that had been decided for them. "We did it," Zephyra said, her voice soft but resolute. "But there is still much to face ahead." Reese nodded, feeling the change within him. This battle wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new journey, one that he and Zephyra would take together, no longer bound by any rituals or destinies. They would seek out a new place, a place where they could live freely, not because of the flame or the rules of distant civilizations. Zephyra gazed towards the distant horizon where the faraway Rocky Mountains began to emerge. "I once believed that this flame was everything," she said, her voice deep. "But now I know that we are the ones who decide our future." Reese looked at her, And in that moment, he understood that sacrifice and fighting were not just for survival. They were for freedom, freedom to choose and to change the future. That was the greatest lesson he had learned throughout this journey. So where do we go? Reese asked, his body still heavy with exhaustion, but his heart now full of something new hope. Forward, Zephyra replied. We will find a place where we can live without fear. We will find a future that we can decide for ourselves. Reese nodded. No matter how many challenges lay ahead, he knew they would not stop. They would continue this journey together, not just for themselves, but for what they believed in. The two of them began to leave the battlefield behind, heading towards the distant mountains where their future awaited. Their steps were firmer than ever, and although the path ahead was still fraught with hardship, they knew that they no longer had to fear. Reese was no longer a lost Earth engineer. He had found his true strength not in the sacred flame, but in the power of free will. And that was the most important thing. Zafara looked at Reese, smiling. We've left the past behind. It's time to begin anew. The sky above them began to brighten, the first rays of the sun, breaking through the clouds, lighting up the path ahead. Their journey had only just begun, and this world with all its unknowns was unfolding before them. No longer bound by ancient rituals, no longer controlled by fate or alien laws, they were free, and this was the greatest power they had. And as they walked into the light, nothing could stop them anymore. After a long period of survival through battles and trials, Reese and Zafira finally began to see the first signs of freedom. However, they both knew that freedom did not come easily and was never free. This journey would not end with a simple victory. The price to be paid was still looming, and they would face even harder decisions in the future. Reese felt that he had become a part of this planet, a part of the new life he had chosen. But not everything was easy. Though he no longer had to worry about the flame seekers or the sacred flame, he still couldn't shake the feeling that he had sacrificed a part of himself in this battle. He had overcome so much, but he wasn't entirely free of the shadow of the past. Zephyra, Reese began, his voice growing heavy as though he were contemplating something profound. We fought and won, but is the price we paid worth it? Zafara didn't answer immediately. She kept walking, her hand firmly gripping her sword, her gaze distant, as if looking into the uncertain future. But Reese could feel that she was deeply contemplating his question. Finally, she stopped and turned toward him, her eyes filled with understanding and empathy. The price we pay is something we can't avoid, Reese, she said, her voice soft but certain. Every action has consequences, and every sacrifice comes with a cost. But without sacrifice, we wouldn't gain what we truly desire. Reese looked at her, and he realized that she had understood this long ago. She had lived with sacrifices and losses, but she had always moved forward, never looking back. Though loss may be the hardest thing, she had learned that it was an inseparable part of the journey. We chose this path, Reese said, a heavy feeling rising in his chest. So are we paying the price for our choices? Zafara nodded, but there was no trace of sorrow or regret in her expression. She looked at Reese, and in her eyes there was a strength that he had never seen in anyone else. She was not just a warrior, she was a symbol of freedom, of an unconquerable spirit. The price we pay isn't always measured by what is lost, she said, but by what we can build from those losses. Zephyra's words echoed in Reese's mind like a warning. They had lost so much in this battle, not just physically, but emotionally, the things they had sacrificed to survive. But what mattered was that they hadn't let those losses defeat them. They had risen, overcome their hardships, and kept moving forward. So what do we do next? Reese asked, his voice now stronger. What challenges lie ahead? Zafara gazed toward the horizon, where the distant mountains were beginning to fade into the mist. A slight smile appeared on her lips, but it wasn't one of joy. It was a smile of understanding. We will continue, she replied. We will find a place with no more control, a place where we can live for ourselves. No more rituals, no more hunters. We will find true freedom. Reese looked at Zafara, feeling a newfound determination in his heart. He understood that freedom was not a destination, it was a journey. And although this journey was filled with challenges and losses, it would lead him and Zafara to what they truly desired, a life unbound by ancient rituals or alien laws. Together, they continued to walk, leaving behind the mountains, the battlefields, and the difficult decisions. They didn't know what the future held, but one thing they knew for sure: they had chosen this path, and they would not turn back. Time passed, and Reese and Zephyra began to feel the shift in their relationship. From an unexpected meeting, one marked by misunderstanding, they had grown into not just teammates, but true friends, individuals ready to sacrifice for each other. The bond between a human and an alien wasn't always easy, but something deeper had started to form between them, something that transcended race culture and preconceived notions. Reese still remembered the first time he saw Zephyra, her gaze cold and determined, every inch the warrior on the battlefield. He never imagined they would stand together fighting for a common cause, but now they have done it. And not only that, they had come to understand each other in ways no one could have ever predicted. They were walking through a desolate land surrounded by dry stones and sand swirling in the wind. Zafara gazed off into the distance where the sun was setting, painting the sky in warm shades of red. She didn't speak, but Reese felt the tranquility in her every movement. They no longer had to worry about the hunters, nor did they have to fight against any ancient rituals. They were free, and that meant they could change everything. "Zafara, where do we go from here?" Reese asked, his voice no longer filled with the anxiety it once carried. He had changed just like she had. Zafara stopped looking at him, then shrugged. "Anywhere. Every place is new to us. But I believe there will be a place where we can live peacefully without the threat of rituals or control from powerful forces." Reese nodded, though there were still many questions in his heart. The relationship between humans and alien civilizations wasn't as simple as it seemed, and even though he was free, the eyes of outside forces would always be upon them. Would they ever truly find peace? Could their relationship survive in a world so full of differences? "Zephyra, do you think our relationship will be accepted?" Reese asked, unable to shake the worries about what might happen to them. "After all, I'm from Earth. We come from two different worlds." Zephyra turned back to him, and in her eyes he saw a glimmer of understanding. "Our relationship isn't simple, but it's ours, and I don't care what others think." She paused, then added, "Love is not something that can be limited by race or civilization. We are individuals. We've overcome many challenges, and we will continue to do so." Zephyra's response made Reese feel a weight lift off his chest. He no longer worried about changing himself to fit the expectations of the world. He and Zephyra had overcome so much, and that made him believe their relationship could exist in this vast world where differences weren't obstacles, but opportunities to learn and grow. "You're right," Reese said, smiling at her. "We don't need to change. We just need to be ourselves." Zephyra smiled back, her eyes bright with understanding. "Then let's find a place where we can live for ourselves." Together they continued along the long road ahead, uncertain of where this journey would take them, but ready to face whatever came. Their relationship was not just the union of two individuals, it was the connection between two civilizations, two different worlds coming together to build a new future. Even after finding freedom, Reese and Zafara quickly realized that maintaining that freedom wasn't easy. Throughout their journey, challenges continued to arise in different forms. One of the greatest challenges they didn't anticipate were the political barriers they now faced. To the powerful forces of alien civilizations, Reese and Zephyra were not just two individuals, but symbols of change, making them targets for those who wished to preserve the existing order. They found themselves on an unfamiliar planet where the lives of civilizations were controlled by councils and powerful empires. The political struggles here were unlike any battles Reese had faced before. Earth was just a tiny speck in this vast universe, and the world Reese and Zafara were passing through had no room for sudden changes. The powers that be could not accept the freedom they sought. "We'll have to face them soon," Reese said, looking toward the distant skyscrapers where the powerful organizations held sway. "The leaders here won't let us live in peace." Zephyra nodded, her expression filled with both concern and determination. "We weren't subdued by the hunters, we weren't defeated by ancient rituals, and now we won't let politics make us falter." But Reese knew that this time would be different. While they had won their previous battles, this time, they were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their future. These political forces couldn't easily be defeated with strength alone. They wielded power through agreements, strategies, and complex machinations. "So what do we do now?" Reese asked, a feeling of unease creeping into his voice. Zephyra didn't answer immediately. She gazed at the clouds above, a cold breeze from the distant horizon blowing toward them. She knew they would have to face hard truths, but there was no turning back. They had come too far. "We'll have to prove we're not a threat," she said. "These leaders fear change. They won't sit idly by when they see us living freely. But if we can show them that we don't seek war, that we only want peace, maybe they'll let us live." Reese listened to her, and while his anxiety increased, he also understood the wisdom in Zephyr's thinking. The freedom they sought couldn't always be won by force. Sometimes strategy and persuasion were the keys. "We need to learn to work with them, not against them." Reese said, a heavy sense of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Otherwise, we'll only make things worse." Zephyr nodded. "We won't fight them unless we have no other choice. We'll show them that our freedom and our lives aren't a threat but an opportunity for all." With this understanding, Reese and Zafara began preparing for their meeting with the political council representatives. They couldn't let their lives be controlled by these forces, but they couldn't confront them with violence either. They would have to find a way to convince the leaders that freedom shouldn't be feared. The day they walked into the conference room, where representatives from various civilizations had gathered, both of them realized there was no room for mistakes. Cold, calculating eyes from all over the universe were fixed on them, and Reese and Zephyra knew that this conversation would decide their fate. They represented not just themselves, but anyone who sought freedom and a future not controlled by those in power. "We didn't come here to make war," Zephyra began, her voice clear and strong. "We came here to prove that a new world is possible, a world not bound by rituals or politics, but by the freedom to choose." The room fell silent for a moment before a representative from a distant civilization spoke. "Freedom is a dangerous idea. If everyone were allowed freedom, could these civilizations even survive?" Zafara didn't respond immediately. She stood tall, looking into every eye in the room. "We are not a threat. We are just individuals, beings who wish to live freely. And if you cannot accept that, then we will find another way to live." Reese stood beside her, feeling the tension in the air, but also understanding that this was a fight not just with force, but with persuasion, with belief in the future. If they didn't succeed today, they would still find another way. And this time, no one would be able to stop them. The dialogue with the representatives of the various civilizations wasn't just a strategic challenge, it was a psychological battle. Reese and Zafara had proven that they were not a threat, but something else was quietly creeping into their surroundings. New threats from underground forces, forces they could not anticipate. After the meeting, while everything seemed peaceful, Reese couldn't shake the feeling of insecurity. They had convinced part of the council, but not all. The opposing representatives were still quietly observing them, casting calculating glances. Reese knew that these forces didn't just rely on brute strength, they could use subtle tactics to control everything. One evening, as they rested at a temporary stop on the planet, an unexpected attack occurred. A group of individuals disguised as innocent travelers approached their location. Reese and Zephyra were discussing their next steps when suddenly they heard hurried footsteps from outside their room. They immediately realized something was wrong. "Be careful," Zephyra whispered, her eyes sharp like a warrior's. "Those are not the people you think." A chill ran through Reese. He knew they hadn't just convinced the people in power on the political council. The supporters of the old order, those who feared change, would not leave them in peace. These individuals were willing to do anything to maintain their power. Zephyra stood up, checking her sword. "We'll have to face them now. Don't let anyone get caught." Reese stood, trying not to show his anxiety. He wasn't a warrior, and he didn't have experience fighting in situations like this. But he knew that if they didn't act now, they would both be caught in a trap from which there would be no escape. "We can't keep running," Reese said, looking straight into Zafara's eyes. "No matter what, we have to face it." Zafara didn't say anything more, just nodded and moved quickly out of the room, pulling Reese along. They moved like shadows in the dark, making no sound. They both knew their opponents were not easily defeated, but they also knew that if they didn't fight, everything would collapse. As they stepped outside, they saw a group of figures standing in the darkness, weapons in hand, their eyes devoid of mercy. These individuals weren't there to negotiate. They had come to capture Reese and Zafara to ensure that the change they were trying to create would never happen. Zafara wasted no time. She swung her sword, charging at the enemy with the precision and decisiveness of a warrior honed through countless battles. Reese, though unarmed, had learned that he could use his agility and resourcefulness to assist Zafara. He threw himself into the fray, using everything he had to create openings for her to strike. But it wasn't an easy battle. Though they succeeded in repelling the group, Reese could feel the tension in the air. They were not just fighting a physical battle, they were fighting a long-term war where underground forces would never give up. The danger didn't just come from the ones in front of them, but from the invisible threats, the ones who quietly pulled the strings behind the scenes. After the fight, they sat by the bank of a small river, panting and covered in wounds. Reese looked at Zafara's face, realizing that she too wasn't easily defeated. But in her eyes, Reese saw something else. A weariness, a realization that this fight would never end. They had won today, but the challenges were far from over. "We'll never be safe, will we?" Reese asked softly, his voice filled with concern. Zafara looked at him for a long time, then replied, "No, we won't. But that doesn't mean we stop. We will continue fighting for what we believe." Reese nodded, a newfound determination swelling in his chest. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. And with Zafara by his side, he knew they would face whatever challenges came their way together. After the surprise attacks and the ever-present danger from political forces, Reese and Zafara knew that they could not stay on this planet forever. Although they had won some small victories, greater dangers still awaited. Their freedom was still a fragile illusion, threatened by those in power and their malevolent schemes. They continued their journey, but this time with a different resolve. Reese was no longer just an engineer accidentally stranded on a distant planet. He was a man determined not to let himself and Zafara become pawns in a larger political game. He had learned how to fight not only with weapons, but also with himself, how to live with difficult decisions, and how to protect himself. Zafara, despite enduring many trials throughout her life, also realized that the road ahead was no longer just about self-preservation. She was no longer merely a warrior for ancient ideals. She and Reese were now fighting together for a future they could decide for themselves, free from the chains of rituals or any controlling force. "We'll have to go beyond the galaxy," Zephyr said as they rested under a tree on the new planet. "This planet is no longer a place where we can be free. The forces here won't let us live in peace." Reese nodded. "I agree. We need to find a place where we can truly start over. No more bindings." "But that doesn't mean it will be easy to find such a place," Zafira added. "This universe is vast, but it's also full of those who want to control, who want to manipulate people like us." Reese looked into her eyes, the worry in his heart beginning to fade. He understood that they were facing a long and dangerous journey, but what gave him confidence was that they were no longer alone. They could face any challenge together. "We'll figure it out," Reese said, his voice calm but full of determination. "I can't live in fear forever. I won't let myself be pushed into the dark corners of this universe." Sephora smiled lightly. "That's why I chose you. You're not just an Earth engineer. You're a person of strength, Reese. The strength of determination, the strength of freedom." They looked at each other for a moment, and Reese realized that this was the first time he truly felt connected to the person beside him. Not because of the sacred flame, not because of the battles they had fought, but because of the bond between two individuals, even from different civilizations. That was what really mattered. The next day, they began preparing for the next part of their journey. Reese and Zafara found an old ship abandoned in a remote area on this planet. They didn't have much time, and the ship seemed severely damaged, but to them, it was their only chance to leave the planet. "We'll have to repair it ourselves," Reese said, inspecting the ship's parts. "But if we're lucky, it will take us out into the universe to find planets where we can live freely." Zafira stepped closer, her eyes scanning the ship with doubt. "Will this ship take us?" Reese smiled, though he wasn't entirely sure. "We'll make it work. We can fix anything as long as we're together." Zafara didn't say anything but nodded, agreeing with Reese. They had already overcome so many challenges together to stop now. The ship might not be perfect, and the next journey would be full of difficulties, but they had each other, and that was the most important thing. In the following days, Reese and Zafira worked tirelessly on the ship. They relied not only on Reese's skill, but also on Zafira's intelligence and combat abilities. Slowly, the ship began to come back to life, though it was still incomplete and flawed. But to them, it was enough. They only needed one opportunity, one chance to escape the grasp of the forces they couldn't change. Finally, after many days of hard work, the ship was ready. They stood before the ship's nose, looking out at the vast sky, a new feeling rising in their hearts. A new future awaited them, a future without ancient rituals, without constraints, but a future where they could freely choose. "Where will we go?" Reese asked, preparing to launch. Zafara looked at him, her eyes shining bright. "Anywhere we want. Freedom isn't a destination, it's our journey. And we will go to the place where we can truly be free." The ship began to lift off from the planet's surface, and Reese felt a profound change within him. This wasn't just a journey through space. It was the journey of his and Zephyr's life, a journey without limits. The ship had begun to lift off the barren planet's surface, soaring into the vastness of space ahead, carrying with it the dreams and hopes of Reese and Zafara. The surroundings gradually blurred as they distanced themselves from the familiar planet, leaving behind only a faint streak of light in the vast emptiness. But with every steel panel they repaired, every lift, the ship made the sense of freedom grew more palpable, as if they weren't just escaping a planet, but everything that had ever confined them. Reese sat by the window of the ship, gazing out at the endless void. From within the ship, he could feel the cold of space, but also the stillness and freedom he had never experienced before. Everything that had once mattered seemed insignificant now. He was no longer an engineer trapped in a hopeless mission. He was free. He and Zephyrah, though from two different worlds, now shared a future they would decide for themselves. Zephyrah walked in, her gaze no longer as cold as when they first met. She had learned to open her heart, and now she looked at Reese with complete trust. "Maybe we've come too far," she said, her voice soft. "But I don't regret it." Reese looked at her and smiled. "Neither do I. No matter how many challenges we face, we're still here, still together. That's what matters." Zephyrah sat beside him. "Challenges aren't something we need to fear. What matters is how we overcome them. I've learned that no matter how bad this world gets, we can make a change if we stand firm together." Zephyrah's words echoed in Reese's mind. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for a different world, a world where freedom wasn't a luxury, but the right of every individual. They had created a legacy, not an empire or a specific piece of land, but a spirit, a belief in freedom and choice. Freedom was not something easily achieved. And though they didn't know where the future would lead them, one thing they were sure of was that they would build it together. Civilizations, politics, ancient rituals could change, but the path they chose would never be altered. "We won't stop, right?" Reese asked, his voice full of conviction. Zafara smiled, looking at him. "Never. We will keep searching for the places where we can be free. And when we find them, we won't let anyone control our lives again." The ship continued to ascend through space, cutting across star paths and distant systems. Reese and Zafara didn't know where they would end up, but they understood that it didn't matter where they were going. It mattered that they were going together. One morning, as the vast sky of space was bathed in a new light, their ship neared a new planet. A planet with unknowns, but one thing was certain: this was where they could start over. This was where they could truly find the freedom they had fought so hard for. Reese stood up and walked toward the window, gazing at the planet before them. It was a promising world with vast oceans, expansive forests, and a clear sky welcoming them. They both knew this was where they would start a new chapter in their lives, a place where there would be no rituals, no oppression, and no fear. "We've arrived," Zephyrah said, looking at him with a gaze full of faith. "Yes," Reese replied. "And now we can live the life we choose." They didn't say anything more, but their eyes were enough to convey everything. They had faced many trials, but now they were ready to begin again. They had created a legacy of resilience, freedom, and choice. And on this new planet, they would live their own life. As Reese and Zephyrah began to rebuild their lives on the new planet, they had no idea that they had become part of a much larger story. While no longer directly facing political machinations, they still felt the invisible surveillance from alien forces, particularly from a large organization, a powerful galactic council they had never heard of. On their new planet, they gradually built a small community. The people they encountered on their journey joined them, and together they created a free society, one where there were no rituals or oppression. But even in peace, there were always eyes watching. They were not just survivors of a war, but now symbols of change, something the powerful forces could not accept. One day, while Reese and Zephora were checking the security systems of their community, they received a secret message. It was a warning from an unknown source, but the content made them take heed. The Galactic Council is watching you. We can't keep living in the shadows of these forces forever, Reese said, his voice low. Maybe we thought we had escaped, but it seems not. Zephyr looked at Reese, her eyes full of concern. The Galactic Council, these organizations have limitless power. They don't just manipulate politics, they control this entire universe. And now we are their target. Reese felt the tension in his chest. He was no longer just an engineer, he had become part of a much bigger power game. But what worried him wasn't just the power of the Galactic Council, it was what they might do to those he cared about. Zephyra stood up, her hand gripping the familiar sword. We can't let them control us anymore. We fought for our freedom, and now we will fight to keep it. Reese looked at her, recognizing the resolve in her eyes. They had overcome so many trials together, and now, though they knew nothing about the organization watching them, Reese understood that they couldn't turn back. A new war awaited them, a war not just for survival, but for the right to choose their freedom. We can't do this alone, but if we form a connection, if we can build a larger movement, Reese began, his voice full of hope. Then we will, Zephyr replied. We will build an alliance not just with these people, but with anyone who wants a free world, one not ruled by powers like the Galactic Council. They began planning. They wouldn't just build a community where people could live freely. They would create a universe-wide movement connecting worlds and civilizations that wanted change. But this fight wouldn't be easy. The Galactic Council was not an organization that could be easily defeated, but Reese and Zephyra knew they had already lost too much to turn back. They had come too far, and this time there was no retreat. Together, they began sending messages, gathering like-minded individuals from other planets. Each person they met, each civilization they encountered, had its own stories of oppression, fear, and the desire to break free from the control of the powerful. But this journey wasn't just a war. It was a battle for belief, for change, and for a world where every individual could choose their own future without being bound. Reese and Zephyra had become symbols of a new beginning, a symbol not of victory, but of hope that in this vast universe, freedom could still exist, and a world free from tyrannical power could still be built. Both of them knew that this fight would be tough, but one thing was certain, they would never give up, and they would continue to fight for the future of generations to come.